Welcome back to another devlog for Joust, where I will cover the biggest update in content since the entire 1.5 years of development. This also includes the first ever boss battle in the game. But before I get into that, it's time for a change of scenery. This is a quick concept piece I created a long time ago, about September 2020 to be exact, which was intended to be the second map. The idea mainly came from the redwood forest of Rotorua here in New Zealand, where I visited sometime before creating it. However, this is a medieval game. I wanted to make it darker and moodier, and a little swampy instead, while sticking to the redwood style trunks. So I popped the old map into Sprite as a template, and started to bring over some of the elements that were used in the concept. Because there's no pathway in the concept, I decided to draw this little footpath for the player to run on. Next, it was time to test the game using the parallax effect, and found while it was in motion that it was quite bare and felt a lot more empty than it should be. So I created all these extra elements at the back. I created some silhouette trees in the background faintly with treetops. For extra mood, these layers have some fog created just by lowering the opacity. In Sprite, it looks quite cramped, but when in motion, it looks a lot better and really comes to life with the parallax effect. These little bushes here I may come back later and update with some more detail, but for now we have our next battleground. And now we can get into the reason why you clicked on this video. So I've had the idea for this boss since very early on, since I decided this game will have bosses. I wanted to create an enemy that was like a checkpoint of everything the player has learned so far, by combining all the different attack styles so far along the battle. I also thought it would be fun to have a surprise enemy, which is why the model is the same as the regular foot jouster. When the player is doing their run, they will unsuspectingly come across the boss thinking it's just a regular foot jouster. Then, when they hit them, they will unexpectedly get knocked back instead of dying. Then the player will hit them again and
surprise, motherfucker!
Their helmet will pop off, revealing the Conqueror, which is just a stupid name that I came up with. The first two knockbacks will be nice long ones. Once the enemy's helmet pops off, then the knockbacks get a lot shorter, making the player have to respond a lot quicker. After the player hits them for the 5th time, they will knock back further again. This time the enemy will be disarmed. Now they will shoot spells at the player. So this will be the first time a projectile will be fired at the enemy, but the mechanic is somewhat similar to the first foot jouster they would have faced before. The enemy must block the spell with their shield by swiping backwards. Once they have cleared the spell, or in some cases taken damage from it, they will continue to run at the defenseless enemy and attack in any direction. After another spell phase, the enemy will be dead and explode into loot everywhere. While it still needs to be implemented, upon death it will check if the boss has been defeated before and reward the player with a piece of generitanium if they haven't, so the player can go and choose their next upgrade at the forge. Now, some other conditions for the boss is that it only appears once in a run, and after only a certain amount of time in a run. Or more specifically, how far the player has run in the run. So at the moment, there's no way to measure how far the player has traveled yet, so I had to create one. I googled what the average height of a human male was, which turned out to be 1.7 meters, which then led me to creating this little cube here. I made it about the same height as the main player, bumped it up a little bit more to make a guesstimate of 2 meters, which turned out to be 3.5 in Unity measurements, and then I just halved that to create 1 in-game meter. Then I just did some math to calculate this in-game 1 meter with how far the player has moved since the start of the game. Then with some more scripting here and there, each enemy now has the option to appear after a certain distance by keying it in this box here. So the next thing I did was this new barricade. I just took the old one, drew some kind of gun on top of it, and then made it fire an arrow at the player for them to defend. Next will be the first enemy for the new map, as the first boss will be at the end of the very first map. So when I was thinking about swamps like this map, the first thing that came to mind was a frog, which then sparked the idea of a little enemy that could hop up and attack you. But to keep the player ready and on their toes, I decided it would only hop 50% of the time. Now, because of the hopping mechanics, this could get really tricky due to the timing and the player's movement, on top of the enemy landing in the player's attack window at a fair enough time. So I created this little white box as a prototype, then when it was within a reasonable range from the player, it would then calculate if it wants to jump. If it wants to jump, the velocity will increase upwards. When it's near the height of its jump, the gravity of the frog will reduce, making it lighter and fall slowly. This will give the player enough of a window to attack it. After a little tweaking, it worked a lot more perfectly than I honestly expected. The timing just felt great. You can see when it is this far away, it begins its hop, which gives the player a fair enough amount of time before they realize it and can react if it's staying on the ground or going to be jumping. And then there was the pace at which it falls slowly enough for the player, giving them a reasonable window for them to attack it as they charge towards it. So after that worked out perfectly, it was time to get animating. So I googled some frogs to get some references, then I came across this thing with these big blue bulging neck things, which then led me to come up with this. Then I cut it all up into small pieces to create a jib, so when you attack it, he explodes on death. So the next one was inspired by some music. While I was thinking up ideas, I was drawn to one of my favorite songs by my favorite band Opeth, which then sparked an idea. About hounds roaming in a forest. There's a deeper meaning to the song, but taking it at face value gave me the idea for some kind of dog-like creature. The first thing to think of was, how can I make this different from the other enemies so far? Well, to notch up the difficulty to the next step, the best thing to do is have it running and charge at the player, making the timing a lot harder and more unexpected when an enemy comes charging out of nowhere off screen. There was no need to prototype this one, as it would be mechanically similar to the other enemies, just with added velocity. So I jumped straight into animating. I created this sprite, which just kind of looked like any big dog. Then to add some extra flair, I decided to give him some face and back armor and demonically reddish eyes. Then I just had to create his run cycle and then a few frames from leaping up and attacking the player. After being imported into Unity and scripted, we can see that the enemy running in from the distance, then jumping to attack the player. If the player misses the attack, they will continue charging off. If the player hits them, they will be knocked back into another phase where they are idle. Then the player just has to attack them one more time. So this one actually took a fair amount of tweaking, as it was hard to get the right speed, as I didn't want it to be too fast or too slow, but I eventually got the feeling just right without it being too hard. So this enemy, I got the idea from Twitter. When sharing the Killer Frog prototype, I asked some of you what you might think that the enemy is, and my buddy Mults thought it was a spider, which then just kickstarted a brilliant idea in my mind, because I was searching for a new enemy idea that would take advantage of high attacks, since there have been only low and mid attacks mostly so far. So the best solution was to create a spider that dangles down and shoots you in the face, named Octojoust. There is just one problem, however. The design works well on this map, because we're in a forest, but since you can completely customize everything, this enemy will have a Spider-Man from the earlier PlayStation games kind of thing going on with the first map. However, because the design and mechanics completely outshine the logic in this case, it was worth still having. So I created this sprite, and then I created a second spawn point, tagged the dangle point, which will allow me to use this in the future for other enemy types. The spider will then track its position to this point on the X value, so it stays perfectly distant from the player. Once it starts, it will slowly slide down, then lob some web balls at you 3 times for the player to block. Then once that is done, it will move into a position and stop tracking, ready for the player to run in and attack it. It will then explode into a jib on death, just like the frog. So that's all the new content for now, and then there'll be just a few more things that have to be done behind the scenes. Now, if you haven't played it yet, there is a demo on itch for you all to play. I'm still collecting all your feedback, which has been great so far. I've had a few people write really long, detailed comments about it, which has been amazing. At this point, I'm just creating more content for the game before actioning any type of feedback yet. But the biggest moment of putting it out there was having someone else play it on live stream. So I'd like to give the biggest, friendliest shout out to TauheedGameDev, who has been the biggest supporter of this channel out of anyone so far, commenting on every video, who then went on to play it on one of his live streams. It was an absolutely insane sensation watching someone else play my game. I'd encourage everyone to go to him and subscribe right now.
But yeah, love the game, man. Really enjoyed it. Controls are in the beginning, they're a bit difficult to get the timing, but once you got the timing, it's so responsive. Responsive? It just feels good. The game just feels good to play. Love it, man.
This also then led to me getting more involved with Twitter to promote the game. When I was there, I noticed a bunch of other really cool developers taking part in a challenge called 100 Days of Game Dev, where you have to just do at least one small piece of game development a day. This has now helped me get a little more involved in the community and help continue to motivate me. So if you want to follow my journey, please head there and check it out. So thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one where I create the next boss.